Good afternoon to all our listeners and viewers of the NDC Heartbeat podcast. We're happy to welcome all those who are listening on radio via WeFM, Vibes FM, Spice Capital Radio. We've got 100.5 FM out of La Bay in Grenville. We are right along out of Brooklyn, New York. And of course, we have the NDC Facebook online platform. We want to welcome you to another NDC Heartbeat episode for today, Sunday. What we're going to be doing today, due to unavoidable technical challenges, we will share with you two pre-recorded programs. One talks about the importance of soft skills in the workplace. Very important video, very important information there. Matter of fact, this has been recently identified as one of the most important skill sets for the workplace. Then we'll also share with you the very important interview, very informative indeed, of the Prime Minister's interview recently on GBN, Beyond the Headlines. Stay with us. Back with you in a moment.
The Grenada Independence Planning Committee, in collaboration with the Grenada Association of Toronto, under the auspices of the Consulate of Grenada in Toronto, present a series of activities in celebration of Grenada's 51st anniversary of independence in Ontario. These activities, under the theme, The Next 50, embracing a future of development, transformation and unity, are as follows. February 2nd from 3 p.m., Independence Anniversary Church Service of Thanksgiving at the First Baptist Church of Toronto, 101 Huron Street, Toronto, Ontario. February 7th, 12 noon, flag raising ceremony and reception at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, 1 Queen's Park, Ontario. Also on February 7th from 6:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of the Tower Clock at the City of Brampton in the national colours of Grenada. Later that evening from 9:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of Niagara Falls in the national colours of Grenada. February 8th from 6 p.m., the Grenada Independence Gala at the Parkview Manor, 55 Barber Green Road, North York, Ontario. And it culminates on February 16th at 1 p.m. with the Showcase Grenada exhibition at the JCA Centre, 995 Hour Road, North York, Ontario. For additional information, please contact 416-595-1343 or 647-594-7210 or send an email to info@grenadaconsulate.com.
Here now is the audio-visual presentation on the importance of soft skills in the workplace.
Many people are thinking about career goals they want to achieve, and on the list, learning new skills. And according to a study by LinkedIn, 92% of professionals believe that soft skills are just as important, if not more important, than technical skills. And joining us now is career coach Liz Bentley. And Liz, I'm so glad we're talking about this. I've been reading so many articles about the issue, and I always think, okay, so exactly what are soft skills?
Okay, so soft skills are people skills. It's self-regulation. It's your ability to communicate, listen, empathize with each other, problem solve, even time management. So critical issues at work.
Yeah. And, why do you think we're seeing a gap in soft skills in the workplace?
Well, soft skills are developed in early childhood, right? And they go on through your adolescence. So if we look back at the old days, right?
Yeah.
There used to be a time when kids would go out and play until, the sun went down. And during that time, they had to navigate each other. They had to work through games and conflict and strategy without parental involvement. And so as time went on, we had a lot more structured play and parents getting involved, teachers getting involved. Then we add devices and technology into it. We have a lot more isolation. And last but not least, of course, COVID shut down a lot of our ability to develop these soft skills. Now, what's important to recognize is this has been eroded over many decades. So it's not just in young people. We're seeing it in all generations.
That is so interesting. I never thought about that being the cause, but that completely makes sense.
Yeah.
Because we don't really talk.
Right.
We don't, it's like, okay, I'm going to text you now. All right,
exactly.
Let's talk about why soft skills are so important for career success.
So, obviously our ability to get along with people is so critical in the workplace because everything has to do with people and how we connect. Now, there are three things that I see are the most important as you're developing your career. One is influencing skills. We have to be able to influence people into our ideas ideas, into thoughts, into urgency, into projects, into seeing the bigger picture and why your work or people on the team's work matters, okay? Second is conflict management, right? Obviously, we're always working through conflict and problem solving. People have different opinions and different views. We've got to be able to listen to all the different views and put things together and work through difficult problems. And last but not least is just fun. People want to go to work and have a good time. People are happier at work, do better, have more enjoyment. We like to laugh. And people with good soft skills are more fun to be around. And then ultimately, clients hire people who are more fun, want to be around people who are more fun. And it's not even about being extroverted. You can be introverted and have great soft skills. So it's really recognizing how important it is to just enjoy each other and connect.
And you know how we were talking about, they kind of start learning these things in childhood, but how can employers train and focus soft skills in the workplace?
So I would love to tell you there's a really easy answer to this. Because we learn it so young, it is harder when we're adults to learn it if we missed and have some of those gaps. The first thing everyone should be thinking about is just yourself. You always have to look in the mirror. So employers and leaders should look at themselves first. The better your soft skills are, the more you're going to help others around you and mentor them and help them navigate it. Second is kind of pinpoint it. Sometimes people have good soft skills in one category, but are missing them somewhere else. So maybe if you just pinpoint it down to helping someone with specific things. And then, of course, there's always training and coaching and things that you can help people kind of develop themselves as they go along.
And more segments like this, just talking about how important these skills are.
Yeah, and teaching kids when they're young how important it is, right?
All right, career coach Liz Bentley, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Here now is the interview held with Prime Minister the Honourable Deacon Mitchell last Monday evening on Beyond the Headlines.
My pleasure is absolute because we do have, once again, first show for the year, Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell with us. Prime Minister, welcome, and a bright, healthy, for all of our sakes, and productive 2025 to you.
Thank you very much, Colin, and let me take the opportunity to wish you and your family similarly a healthy, happy, and prosperous 2025 and beyond. Once we have health, I think the rest will follow. And so it's also my absolute pleasure as well to take the opportunity to say best wishes to the nation, Grenada, Carriacou, and Peter Martinique, for our citizens as well as our citizens in the diaspora. I look forward to continuing to serve with pleasure on your behalf, and I hope we continue to achieve great things in 2025 and to lay the foundation for achieving even greater things beyond 2025.
Excellent. You came in on an agenda of 2020 of transformation. So let us just first of all reflect on 2024. And if you can, and I will start off this program the very same way I started off the one in 2024, and ask you to share with us probably 3 things that you're most proud of as you reflect on your work in 2024.
Well, I would want to say I want to reflect on the work of the citizens of Grenada rather than just on my work. So I think the starting point would be our response to Hurricane Beryl. I think I'm happy and proud of the fact that as Grenadians, we recognize the need to assist our brothers and sisters who were devastated by the impact of Hurricane Beryl, particularly in Carriacou and Petit Martinique, and particularly in the northern parishes. The spirit of volunteerism, empathy, concern, donation was overwhelming, resounding, and it contributed in large measure, I think, to the swiftness of the response and the swiftness of the recovery, and to building, I think, the capacity of Grenadians to, when you punched, to being able to get up and respond positively, knowing that we all shall get through this together. So I think unquestionably, I think that despite the fact that obviously we don't want to go through hurricane storms or natural disasters, I think the overwhelming response of the people of Grenada has left me proud to be a Grenadian, and it augurs well, I think, for the future development of the country in terms of our volunteerism, in terms of our patriotism, in terms of our unity and recognizing that we are brothers keepers, especially when we find ourselves in circumstances that are not of our own doing. I think the second highlight will clearly be the year-long independence celebrations, which culminated with a fantastic commemorative event at the National Stadium. I think for anyone who witnessed the event, whether you were there in person or whether you looked at it on television or via live streaming, I think, again, that spirit of patriotism, I think, was overwhelming. And throughout my travels, even within the region, persons who were not Grenadians commented on how proud they felt to be part of a region where the populace was that proud, that patriotic, that united in recognizing their accomplishments, despite the trials and tribulations that we've had along that journey in celebrating our 50th anniversary of independence. And so I think that overwhelming spirit of patriotism and unity was very emotional, but I think a very high moment for our country. And I think, again, that too augurs well. We are fast approaching our 51st year as a nation. And I want to particularly highlight, I think, the pinning ceremony that we did for many of the students throughout the primary and secondary schools. I think it's important for us to ensure that we inculcate in them that spirit of patriotism, that spirit of understanding that independence is not just any other holiday. It's really the birth of a nation and for Grenadian identity or Grenadian uniqueness. And despite whatever shortcomings we may have as a very, very young nation, the fact is we have a wonderful opportunity to create ourselves in our own image and likeness, to continue championing Grenada and Caribbean civilization, and to giving praise and glory to the paradise that Grenada is. And so we have an individual and collective responsibility to continue building that and to continue safeguarding that for the next generations of Grenadians to come. So I think that was absolutely a highlight. And then I would say the third highlight of Citizens of Grenada is undoubtedly the performance of our athletes at the Olympics, knowing what Grenada was going through. And I can't help but feel that probably gave them an extra impetus to make sure that they did themselves, their family, the citizens of Grenada, and by extension, the Caribbean and black people proud. Not just in winning and getting medals, but I think the way they carry themselves. Again, that certainly, I think, shows a particularly bright example for young men and women to follow. I mean, there are lots of other things, but I think those three, in my view, captured the essence of our Grenadianness. One, the celebration. Two, the resilience when you face with significant and overwhelming negative circumstances. And then three, that spirit of triumph where you pour through and you go on to not just be competitive, but to deliver and win against the best of the best across the world. So I think those three events summarizes the fact that it's been a hell of a year.
Yeah, I will come back certainly to the latter two, but let me just ask you for two things upon reflection that you wish that you had handled differently or turned out differently.
Well, I wish we never had a hurricane. There's no question about that. So yes, earlier in the year we also had a severe drought. And that was followed immediately on the heels of then having to deal with the hurricane. So I think, in terms of our perspective on how we manage the country and what sort of values we need to ensure that we put into our population and into our young people in particular, is that we have to accept that when we talk about resilience, this is not something that's fanciful. That's the reality. And that we have to be prepared to ensure that in our daily activities, from the food we eat, the water we drink, the type of buildings we construct, the amount of vehicles we put on the road, where we build our buildings, where we build our homes, how we educate ourselves, how we create redundancy for a lot of the essential services to our country, from basic things like water to energy. We need to make sure that that concept of resilience runs through the way in which we organize our communities and our societies, because if not, we really do run the risk of some existential threats. And it may seem sometimes to be simple things that we don't take for granted, but let's take energy. We consume our energy from the importation of diesel. There's been so much challenges in the geopolitical world. If we can't get diesel in Grenada for 3 months, it means we have no energy.
All right.
And fundamentally, our way of life will grind to a halt. So it means, from a resilience point of view, we have to start looking at how then do we address our energy security? How do we ramp up the penetration of renewable energy? into our society, because we will be consuming more and more energy, especially as we move more and more into technology and digitization. So we have to make sure that we actually plan the society, and I've been saying this a lot. We can no longer just get up and hope that somebody else will plan our lives for us, somebody else will plan our villages and communities for us. And we have to start thinking about how do we create the necessary security, whether it's food security, energy security, infrastructure security, public safety, safety from crime, violence, etc., to really make sure that those things, that the population begins to understand the importance of those things if we are to safeguard and build upon the gains we've made in the country.
Let's pursue this a little bit, because how to? There's agreement, and I don't believe anyone, once you're on planet Earth, will disagree with anything that you're saying, and certainly the importance of planning our way forward, and hence the conversation about the Vision 75. But dealing with the people aspect, how do we go about by bringing about this mindset of resilience? How do we create this culture of caring and responsibility, caring for Grenada, caring for ourselves, which deals with our human health or environmental health? How do we go about this?
Well, I think it starts first from leadership. We have to have leaders who actually care about this, and second, who are prepared to talk about it, and third, who are then prepared to say, how do we, in fact, create the strategy, the plans and the actions, and how do you measure those to make sure that we are being effective? Mm-hmm. So that's why I talk about having a planned society, because I've recognized, certainly I think in my lifetime, that the country has moved more and more away from planning what happens to the society. And forgive me for using the PRG as a reference simply because of I think, my age. Mm-hmm. But it was clear to me that for the short period of the PRG's government, that there was, in fact, a very deliberate attempt at planning. And I think as a result, the impact of the revolution was felt in a more deliberate way. Mm-hmm. I think if you look at Sir Eric Matthew Gary, I don't think he just woke up one morning and said Grenada is going to be an independent nation. He would have clearly sensed that there was a goal, a vision, and then a plan that worked towards it. And you can look at many of the achievements that are associated with Sir Eric Matthew Gary, and it was quite clear that he would have had a vision, he would have had a goal. And that's why we would have had a St. George's University, and then been brave enough to take those chances. Now, to some extent, the more complex and sophisticated a society is the more difficult it is to plan, it's the more difficult it is to manage, and obviously, Grenada in 2025 is not Grenada in 1974, and it's not Grenada in 1979, which is all the more reason why we need to make sure that we can plan what will happen to Grenada over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And as I said, it starts with leadership, and not just at a political level, at a business level, at a community level, at a village level. I just came from St. David, my constituency, and I visited a home, the last home I visited before leaving. And on leaving, one of the thoughts that occurs to me is that, one of the obvious ways, in my view, to improve what happens in our community, I will call it this: let's adopt a neighbor community. And I say this because many of us are living close to people who are right next to us, who are living in some appalling conditions. Mm-hmm. We either don't know, we don't care, and we seem not to understand what the consequences of not doing and not caring will be for us. Because you run the risk that their children will grow up to be dysfunctional, potentially criminals, and potentially people who either don't care either about what happens to you and your children. And then you or your children will have a problem 5 or 10 years from now, right, if we don't care about what happens to our neighbors. So if our neighbors' kids don't have food to eat, and we have extra food, and we don't care enough to be able to say, let me check on the neighbor and help feed someone who's less fortunate, so that at least they don't feel no one cares about them, and therefore they don't care about anyone, and then it leads to delinquent behavior or criminal behavior, then you are going to become the victim of the crime, right, or the criminal. So I'm saying this to say, similarly, when we talk about the mindset about what happens to building resilience into our communities, let's take an obvious example. If we pursue material things at all costs, then we will say it's fine, you can dump the mangrove and go build in the mangrove. But you can't control the rain, and you can't control the weather. And eventually the river will come down, your building will get flooded out, your building will get destroyed. And then what will you do? You will come and say to the government, I want compensation, help me, I invested and I lost all my business. But if we are thinking about resilience, we ought to be sensible and strong enough to say, hold on, it can't be development at all costs. It can't be a building at all costs. This is not a place for building because it simply is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to get to that point where we begin to have those conversations, accept that, and then act on the enforcement, not just from a legal point of view, but also from a common sense point of view. Because at the end of the day, the government is an inanimate thing. It's made up of people who have to serve the public. But at the end of the day, if you made the investment and you built in an area that is flood prone, and then your building is washed away, the government isn't really feeling anything. It's not a pain. It's you who've lost your investment or run the risk of losing your life, as the case might be. So we have to be able to recognize that there are natural consequences to some of the actions we do when those actions are not.
How do we cultivate this honesty? Because, to be honest, at this stage, it's a gimme society. There's a dependency syndrome that has been cultivated over a number of years, really. But what you're speaking about here now is personal responsibility and looking at the big picture, even with our individual decisions.
Personal and collective, because to get to the collective, we all have to start with us personally. But every habit that is formed could be unlearned, and new habits could be relearned. And so we have to recognize that societies grow and prosper by adopting the right habits and the right culture. Societies fail and retard or underdevelop or go backwards by adopting the wrong attitudes and the wrong posture. So if we are an organized society, a gimme, me alone, I first is going to lead to a failed society. And I don't have to hide to say that, because there are countless examples right around us in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. If we put self and materialism at all costs above the other values of community, of sharing, of fairness, of merit, the society will fail. I mean, that's nothing to debate about. Right. And so I'm saying we have to recognize that there has to be some give and take. There are limits to our material advancement, especially in a small island state. There are limits to our physical infrastructure development. And therefore, we have to care about what happens to each other. And we have to care about what happens to the environment. And we have to care about the long-term sustainability of the actions that we engage in. So if you think it's okay to just throw garbage onto the streets, because we pay the solid waste to clean it up, well, it's just a matter of time when one day solid waste may not be able to pick it up. It may go bankrupt. The cost of collecting the garbage may overwhelm its operations, and it gets stuck in a drain. And then a flood is going to come, and it's the same garbage that's going to come down in your house or someone else's house. So we have to recognize that it's cause and effect, and there has to be limits to me. But I'm saying those behaviors can be unlearned. Right, and then I think for each of us, we also owe it to the next generation. So it may be that you can unlearn something because in your 50s or 60s, that's fine. Therefore, the focus is on us as leaders to be able to say we then need to concentrate on the 5, the 10, the 15, the 20-year-olds, because they're what's saving.
So likewise, there needs to be a deliberate strategy to create this type of citizen.
Absolutely.
So we are speaking about the type of citizen that we would want to see, part of Vision 75, and deliberately working to cultivate that culture.
Yes.
Would that mean putting a task force strategy team that looks at the human side? Because we would look at economic development as well.
Yes.
But looking at the human side to ensure that that's the type of citizen that we're developing.
Absolutely, and I think that is even more important than the economic development. Because fundamentally, if you do that, human beings are gifted. Solving economic challenges are essentially about material things. How do you allocate resources to suit human needs, wants, and desires? But in order to get to that, you have to create a particular kind of human being that actually first has the curiosity, the care, the empathy, the creativity that will make him better able at making wise decisions as to how to allocate the resources that you have. So it's important for us to be able to create a human being who's kind. Because if I'm not kind, then when I have the $100, I would say all of it is mine. And I don't care what happens to the other person.
And being your brother's keeper.
Precisely. But if you cultivate a human being that's kind, that's caring, that's considerate, you will then say, okay, fine, I only need 70 to live off. I don't need the other 30, and therefore, in those circumstances, I'm happy to pay my staff some more because I recognize they need it more than I do. The extra 30 isn't going to do anything to my standard of living, but it will make a significant difference to their standard of living. So let me give them the other 30. Right? If we are going to create citizens recognizing that English is a minority language spoken in this part of the world. Mm-hmm. So if we recognize that we want the next generation of Grenadians to be more competitive, to be global citizens, then we will take a decision that says, as much as foreign languages may not come natural, it doesn't come natural simply because we haven't made it natural at the primary school level where we are teaching it sufficiently and so on. So it seems not natural, but language obviously is learned faster at an earlier age. We can then obviously make a deliberate investment in bringing in foreign language teachers in Spanish or French or whichever language we choose to pursue, Mandarin, on the basis that we recognize for a small population of 100,000, it would be a clear advantage, for example, if 1 in every 2 Grenadians could speak Mandarin. It would open up economic opportunities, job opportunities almost overnight, or Spanish or French, as the case might be. So we have to take that deliberate decision to say this is what we will do. So, someone took a deliberate decision to say we will create and partner with families out of the US that created St. George's University, so that 40 years later, large numbers of Grenadians are employed there and thousands of medical students and veterinary students have graduated. Someone took the decision to say, despite the difficulty of the task, we are going to cut down the hills, we are going to dump the land, and we'll create an airport. For all of the business men and women who've taken risk and invested in Grenada, they took that decision. So the fact is, we create the future, right? And we have to decide whether we'll create a positive future. And I want to re-emphasize that and I've been talking about this a lot, by the values we inculcate in our citizens. If we don't inculcate hard work or re-inculcate it, if we don't...
Hard work is likewise a learned behavior.
Yes.
Correct.
And if it's learned after a while, it's not hard work.
Right.
Right. It becomes enjoyable and pleasurable. You probably wouldn't be able to sit still if you're not doing something. If we don't re-emphasize punctuality, honesty, integrity, caring for other persons and so on, you will end up with a very crass and crude and violent society. And we have to recognize that what will fuel that oftentimes is, again, poverty. Because when you have those kinds of behaviors, it will lead to poverty.
Right.
Lack of productivity would lead to low productive output, lower GDP, a smaller cake to share, hungrier persons, desperate persons, and you'll end up with a lot of the job.
And essentially there'll be a wider divide between the rich and the poor, and that would where we'd have a lot of the social fallout.
Precisely.
When can we anticipate seeing task force committees on the implementation of these aspirations?
Right, so I mean, obviously these are complex issues, so I think I want to start first with education. And you would notice we've gradually gone about tackling accessibility issues. The next major stage that we're at is, in fact, Cabinet has approved the skills training component of education as a major facet of what we need to do to essentially rearrange our education system. And we're in the process of putting together a delivery unit that will take on this task. Now, the skills here, and I want to emphasize that, it's not just hard skills, it's not just technical skills. The soft skills are absolutely critical, and in fact, some of the studies are showing that even from an employability point of view, that soft skills are perhaps even more important in today's world. The ability to make the right judgment, the ability to have empathy, the ability to work collaboratively rather than competitively. So we recognize, and if you go back to our schools, you'll see the example. What do we encourage? You want everybody to come first in common entrance, first in class, first in this, first in that. Well, of course, if that's the system, only one person can come first. And if you want to encourage a system, well, that's all you value, the person comes first. Then what about the other 29 or 30 persons in the class? But are we talking about problem solving, working together, cooperation? Because when you go out in the real world, that's it. If you don't line up for the bus, and you push and you're fighting, and it takes longer to get on the bus, and you may never get on the bus. If you line up, it becomes a lot easier, it becomes a lot faster. If you're not punctual, you inconveniencing everybody else. They may simply not wait on you and move on. So we can go on and on. So I'm saying that delivery unit is in the process. So what we've sought to do for both what I call hardcore transformative projects and softer ones, education being a clear example of a softer one, is we are creating delivery units where we'd have a permanent secretary permanently assigned to tackle that particular transformative project, and the education curriculum is an introduction of skills training, both hard and soft skills to the education system is one of those. We will be appointing an executive sponsor, and we will be appointing project managers, retaining consultants and so on to help us actually drive the delivery of these processes over a period of time. Now, education in particular is not one that will begin and end as, say, building a hospital. And so part of it obviously will be ultimately getting us certain targets and milestones, and then hopefully having more and more mainstreaming of this within the education system. So we will be announcing who the permanent secretary on assignment is, who the executive sponsor is, and so on within the next 30 to 45 days. And we've taken a similar approach for some of the other transformative projects that we need to tackle, for example, the building of the hospital. And the reason for that is because, well, this year has been compounded by Hurricane Beryl and the need to respond to it. But even prior to that, we recognize that to some extent, the task of engaging in transformation while at the same time keeping the lights open the days is difficult. And the public service in its current construct is not, simply doesn't have the bandwidth and the capacity to be able to take on all of it. But at the same time, we do not want to completely outsource some of the transformative projects, because we think it would be important from a learning perspective for the public service to be intimately involved in the delivery unit. Particularly, hence we want to have a permanent secretary on assignment, because we believe some of the culture, the ethos, the modalities, the procedures, the procurement, all of that will ultimately help to make the public service
more efficient
and more outcomes oriented, because this is one of the critical thing, and it's one of the challenges we face in the public service, that we have to projectize, if I may use that term, a lot more of what we do. There has to be a beginning and an end, and sometimes the things that just never ends, which means it never gets done. So we're hoping that by taking that approach, it will allow the public service to continue doing what we would call the normal run-of-the-mill stuff and be efficient at it and learn from some of the delivery units. But at the same time, we need to have dedicated teams of people who, when they get up in the morning, the only thing they think of is how do I put Grenada on a path to make sure that the education curriculum reform takes place, and that by 2026, 2027, we can show measurable progress in introducing skills training into a curriculum system, in building the centers of excellence where our students can, in fact, get that type of education, in mainstreaming it to the point that when you get to Form 1, Form 2, or Form 3, you can decide with right guidance and counseling, I don't need to spend the next 2 or 3 years of my life, quote unquote, beating books, when my passion, when my talent is in fashion design. Right? And therefore, let me study the theory of fashion design. Let me study whatever academic aspects of it that I need, so that when I get into the practical side of it, I'm well advanced, as opposed to spending all my time.
I know the skills centers was something that you spoke of from 2022, immediately upon coming in. So what we're saying that within the next year and a half, we'll be able to see examples of these skill centers up and running.
Well, I don't want to definitively say within the year and a half, because I think the truth is it may not likely be a one-size-fits-all approach. We're going to have to be doing a number of things, and we've started already. So, for example, at the primary school level, the Ministry of Education has been introducing more and more skills, what I would call departments within the primary schools themselves, so that the children get basic exposure to some of it. We want to make sure that we push not just quantity but quality education. So you'd see that the Minister of Education has talked a lot about centers of excellence, because we think it's important, because of our population size, to make sure that we can focus. We will not be able to do every skill, right? But we think it's critical to focus on some key areas where we feel confident that, one, the skills are absolutely needed in Grenada, regionally and internationally, and where there's growth for that, so that when people are educated, they don't have difficulties finding the jobs. And second, the areas where we believe there is natural growth.
And that must be pegged to our National Developmental Plan.
Absolutely.
All right.
So I'll give an example. It means our education system, we intend to build a new hospital. It doesn't just need doctors and nurses. It needs a host of career professionals to support that. It therefore means, both from an education and even from a scholarship and an investment point of view, we are going to have to make the decision to say, if we want our people to benefit from this, we are going to have to give more scholarships. We are going to have greater focus on education and skills that in fact, align with the specific goal, because we believe if we get it right, it can be a transformative thing for the economy of Grenada. It therefore means you have to invest in that.
Easy to agree to that. When are we going to see some decision making on the type of developmental thrust that we believe can take us for the next 25 or 50 years, and by virtue of that, doubling down on the scholarship awards, etc.?
Right. So as we speak, the Ministry of Education has in fact submitted a draft policy for consideration by the cabinet, very much dealing with our scholarship policy, because we recognize that there was no policy. It was ad hoc. It was all over the place. So it's draft. They've asked for more time to do further stakeholder engagement and consultation. My reading of it, it is already a significant improvement on what.
And by scholarship policy here, you mean tying the awards to national development as opposed to giving awards?
Precisely. Right. Because you see, we can't afford these scholarships in the round. I think the figures show, and I perhaps shouldn't, for risk of misquoting the figure, but over the last decade, for example, millions of dollars, probably as much as $80 to $100 million worth of scholarships have been given out.
The government of Grenada easily gives upwards of 200 scholarships per year.
Right. So I'm saying tens of millions of dollars have been given out or invested in education via scholarships. The question is, are the outcomes in the areas we need it? And therefore, we have to make sure, because you could throw money at a problem and not solve the problem. Okay. And so we need to make sure that the education trust, the scholarship trusts, are aligned with the goals and the needs and where the vacancies are, and vacancies that are important towards developmental trust. And that's why we need to have the scholarship policy. So for example, you may, to be more practical, should you give scholarships for psychology, or should you give scholarships for specialist doctors? Right? Those are questions we'll have to ask. And in fairness to the public, when someone comes and says, I want to study psychology, if we say we're not giving you scholarships, we should be able to rationalize why, and be able to say to you, look, as it stands, we do not have any doctors who are specialists in Grenada. And therefore, it means that for basic specialist services, our citizens are paying tens of thousands of dollars and having to leave the country, or many times die.
But let me ask you this, because I believe we have many Grenadian specialists. They're not in Grenada. And they would have gotten their fundamental training on the backs of the Grenadian people through scholarships. So what strategy is there as a starter to address those individuals who have benefited from tax dollars serving the population?
Well, I think two things. In fact, we've been submitted data which shows, I think, that perhaps in excess of 100 million, up to $200 or even $300 million worth of scholarships via SG, for example, has been given to Grenadian, particularly in the medical fields, over the years, almost all of them outside of Grenada. So I think first, purely from an appeal to conscience, and from engagement with the diaspora, and in fairness to the diaspora medical profession, I think they've always expressed a willingness to give back, to come back, and to serve. But I also think there's a bit of a cultural challenge where oftentimes they're not received well,
right?
Or there are significant roadblocks in terms of receiving well. And I'm talking about this. That is a major challenge. It's one of the reasons why people give up. There are doctors who wish to volunteer. For some reason, there's a culture of almost heaping scorn on them. And we can't continue to preside over failure, and we can't continue to preside over a poor health system when there are people, Grenadians, in the diaspora, oftentimes first educated in Grenada, well, certainly up to TAMCC educated in Grenada, who have family members there and who are willing to offer, oftentimes on a voluntary or pro bono basis, their services. And they can't even get the opportunity to volunteer simply because we put roadblocks, or we block them, or we try and put them to the
So the Grenadian Medical and Dental Council needs to...
Well, it's not just the Medical and Dental Council. I think the entire medical fraternity in Grenada needs to address this cultural issue. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you as a Prime Minister, we sometimes feel as if we are fighting against medical professionals sometimes to get them to receive help from their colleagues. And I'm unapologetic about that because it is the truth. Whether it's basic things like getting persons who, and it's pro bono. Right. And so it's a culture that has changed. I don't understand why, because it seems to me it is presiding over failure. And I don't think we can hide by saying, if you poll the public, people are not happy with the medical services that they receive, whether it's the state of the infrastructure, whether it's the state of care, or whether it's just the absence of the specialists that are needed. So I'm saying we could either do nothing and continue the situation, or accept that we have a major challenge and go about tackling that challenge. Obviously, as the Prime Minister of the country, I am prepared to tackle the challenge. I am prepared to be voted out of office for speaking the truth. Because mark my word, if we don't address this issue, 5, 10, 15 years from now, it will be even worse.
And do we anticipate having a task force being, tasked
more than task force,
with developing?
The healthcare system has to be comprehensively reformed.
No, agreed. But, just this receiving of help, both in terms of the volunteerism from the folks in diaspora and the accepting in Grenada, because that's an easy win and should be a low-hanging fruit.
Right. So I'm hoping we have an organization called GDAC, Grenada Diaspora Advisory Council, which has spent the last 2.5 years giving up the time and energy and bringing a lot of the medical professionals and so on in the diaspora together, whether from London, Canada, the US, and so on, who are ready and willing to go, frankly, at our request. It requires us, I'm saying here, the government, the Ministry of Health, Medical and Dental Council, hospital administration, staff, and so on, to put the necessary arrangements in place that could allow for these medical professionals to begin to come and for us to enter into a rotation process. You may or may not know, for example, that we have not had an anesthesiologist. And with my limited medical knowledge, that means basic surgery and so on can't take place. Right. So if people are willing then to volunteer to try and find someone and bring them in, and then we put them through the ringer, why would they come? Right? So I'm saying, and there are shortages of many of these types of professions, not just in Grenada, but throughout the region and frankly worldwide. So if someone is volunteering, and we have to understand that if you have a busy specialist who's successful and has a 2-week holiday break, and he's convinced to come and help and volunteer in Grenada, and we start telling him he has to send things 6 months in advance and 8 months in advance and put him through that ringer, he's going to say thank you, goodbye. I can go to Africa, I can go to the Gaza Strip, I can go to Libya, I can go to Haiti, and I can be far more impactful.
But we do have successful examples of the volunteerism here in Grenada. So the question is, how do we accommodate our own?
Well, I think it's the culture change, and it's what I'm going back about recognizing. You can't sit by and preside over failure, preside over misery, preside over the fact that by any yardstick, your own sense of happiness, your own sense of gratification, your own stress level, because it clearly is a stressful job, and not recognize that change has to come, and then go about trying to support the processes for change. So I'm saying that's one aspect of it. So, but also, we cannot continue educating our citizens and then have them not have a sense of patriotism and not have a willingness to want to serve, whether in Grenada or outside of Grenada, and if you're serving outside of Grenada, be prepared to give back. That has to change. I do not necessarily subscribe to the idea that the only way to serve Grenada is to be in Grenada. Correct. Right? Because sometimes, depending on your skill set, depending on your talent and the kind of income you can earn, you are better off serving Grenada outside of Grenada. You can return funds to Grenada. You can pay back the school loan. You could be so successful a doctor, you can say, listen, having gotten a scholarship, and because I didn't get the chance to serve in Grenada, and because I'm making so much money, let me contribute towards educating another Grenadian citizen by paying back my scholarship or by taking them up when they're in the US and providing housing, board, lodging, etc. for them. So that framework has to be addressed. Of course, one approach would be to sue people and say, listen, you got a scholarship, you're bonded, we're coming after you for the money. But I think that would be counterproductive. And ultimately, I'm still happier to have an educated Grenadian than a non-educated Grenadian, even if they choose not to serve in Grenada. So I think from that perspective, we recognize that. But going back to the scholarship point, I'm making a point to say that, let's take the hospitality sector. Tourism is the single biggest, largest contributor to GDP. And all the hotels will tell you there are no Grenadian chefs.
Right. There were no executive chefs.
No executive chefs, there are no sous chefs. I mean, we can go on. And that has been going on For the last
and in the meantime, less than 5% of the scholarships awarded is in the tourism sector.
Precisely.
Right.
And therefore, we can be very targeted to say we will award 20 scholarships to create executive chefs, to create sous chefs. Even if 5 or 10 stay overseas, then you're filling the needs and so on. So that's what I mean about being very deliberate and targeted with our scholarships programming to make sure that they match the needs of the sectors where there's clear demand for it, but also to project about where the new jobs are going to come from in terms of where the world is going. And that is why, for example, we've already started things like the digital workforce program. Because there's enormous growth in
Prime Minister, before you go on to that, it's time for us to take a break. So let's take the break and we come back. I certainly would want to deal with the health sector, but the new jobs, we will start off there. All right? So viewers and listeners, we'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers and listeners. We have Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell with us this evening on Beyond the Headlines. Prime Minister, you're talking of new avenues, as it were, in the training of Grenadians. Just thought and the embracing of the digital economy.
So we have to recognize that economic activity changes all the time. And it's important for us to look at where the next wave of economic activity is going to come from, and it's already here. It's, as this is, the fourth economic revolution, and that is big data, technology, digitization. And so it's important for us to make sure that we give our citizens, and I want to emphasize not just young citizens, because sometimes people feel that's all who we speak of, our citizens, the ability to live in that world, to work in that world, and to earn higher incomes. And I think this is critical, because I think one of the things that unfortunately has plagued the Caribbean is stagnation. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that we can double people's income, real income, over the next 5 to 10 years, because if not, inflation isn't going to go away, and people's ability to continue just maintaining their lifestyles is going to be very, very difficult. And there are areas of significant growth where there's significant job demand and unfulfilled job demand, and that really is in the technological field, the digital space. And the education and the training that comes with this, luckily, is not the long form, right, expensive type of education. It's not the first degree, it's not master's degree, it's not the PhD. It's oftentimes training that could be accomplished in 6 months, 3 months, a year, that leads in many instances to direct employment at significantly improved wages than all of the traditional jobs we have. And so we've launched a pilot to test those assumptions, to look at the real cost of the training, and then to verify that when the training is complete, that those who have successfully passed the training will in fact land the jobs that I've just described.
Have we identified the areas in which we would want to do the training?
Yes, so we actually launched the pilot. The pilot is in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. We have partnered with a Canadian firm. We are paying for the training. The training is in cybersecurity. So it would lead to various levels of certification in cybersecurity as part of the contract with the firm that's doing the training. So the training isn't just training, but you actually provide it with the internet. Mm-hmm. You provide with a lot of mentoring as well, and a lot of hand-holding between completing the training and getting the job placement. The beauty about the cybersecurity world is that there are, and these things are validated worldwide, 3.4 million and growing unfulfilled cybersecurity jobs. In other words, if you were trained and became a cybersecurity analyst, there are 3.4 million potential employment opportunities for you, and you don't have to leave Grenada. Because in the digital world, once you have access to high-speed internet and a computer, you are employable anywhere in the world. And so it means your ability to earn income isn't going to be based on the pay scale in Grenada or the Caribbean. It is really going to be based on that pay scale for the 3.4 million people worldwide.
And your skills.
And your skill set. Mm-hmm. And we are talking here with starting salaries in those areas at $3,000 US per month. That's more than a minister government makes. Mm-hmm. So I want to repeat that. Where some of these starting salaries are around $3,000 US a month, it is more than a current government of Grenada minister's salary for a 6-month training. And so it is cybersecurity, it is full stack development, those sort of areas, because the demand is enormous. The training periods are short once you're committed and you're prepared to go. And we are prepared to make that investment, because even within Grenada, almost all of the businesses here are under cybersecurity threat. Government institutions are under cybersecurity threat. All of our law enforcement agencies, from police, prisons, need cybersecurity analysis. Banks, insurance companies, we can go on. Personal safety, our data, everything is online. And so I suspect that after the trading, most of our Grenadian citizens will be gobbled up, even just domestically. And so what we're hoping to do is, in fact, scale this out. So that we...
how many are in the pilot?
100.
100, okay.
100. And we are looking to get to 500 quite quickly. So the official training commences, I think, around the 19th of January. So we had the launch of the program itself in December. The training itself starts. We have 2 training centers, one in St. Patrick. And I want to emphasize that because we want to re-emphasize the importance of the rural economy and giving persons in the rural parishes the opportunity. College in the computer lab there, and the other one is in St. George's. I'm also actively engaged in seeking international partnerships and funding for this kind of training. The Canadian government, through the Minister for International Development and Cooperation, announced Canada's support for the CARICOM Future Skills Fund, which was launched under my chairmanship of CARICOM, which is designed specifically to address that, getting funding to fund skills training and digital skills training within the Caribbean. We are in talks with other countries. We're hoping that by the time we get to Barbados that we could have the beginning. But the idea that will fund skills training, education, digital training education throughout the region, because we really do see this as an opportunity where if we invest in our and particularly if they don't have to leave the country, because that brain drain is always an issue, but can provide their services worldwide and then bring income in. That's essentially the development we need, and bring income where their pay scales and their salaries are much higher than what they would here. Then they would have the kind of economic activity that will truly lead to the economic development.
While we think futuristic in that vein, we still have our realities. Yes. And let me just go to TAMCC. I know that we moved towards the free tuition for tertiary education, TAMCC and NULO being beneficiaries, or the students there. Both you and I have sons attending TAMCC, yes, and we're both aware that they lost considerable face time last term because of the flooding.
Yes.
What can we do about the TAMCC campus that would ensure that the education is not disrupted?
Well, I mean, obviously it's located partly in a flood-prone area. I mean, you know, that entire area there obviously is that, and so it means if we get the kind of rains that we got, to be honest, it would be difficult to mitigate those circumstances. Obviously, the drains need to be kept clean. We need to look at, from an engineering point of view, what other things can be done to minimize the flooding. But again, it goes back to the whole question of building resilience into education, because my question would be, could not some of the things have been done remotely? You know, I don't understand why, if a building is flooded out in Grenada from an education point of view, you tell the children that there is no school. In my view, having gone through COVID, I'm almost sure every child at TAMCC has access to a laptop and has access to the internet. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, there are sufficient community centers that provide access to the internet. So we have to be, frankly, the leadership of a lot of our institutions, and particularly education institutions, need to be a little more imaginative, a little more flexible, a little more progressive. They are the gatekeepers. You have to decide whether you're going to keep us in the 20th century or whether you're going to propel us. China. And the real education, we are not valuing, right? And we are not also showing the children. We're not inspiring them. We're not leading them. I mean, you know, the whole point about school is that a child should be excited to go learn. You should be making the child curious. You should be making the child want to learn, want to be a problem solver. If you're dumbing down the child, if you're boring them to death, you essentially just babysitting them. And certainly at TAMCC, which is our premier tertiary level institution, I'm saying this openly, and it's not meant as a slight to anyone. A new principal has been appointed. I hope that he can deliver on a far more transformative, imaginative, progressive, entrepreneur-based center of excellence. The people who are going to lead Grenada are going to have to come out of TAMCC. And so we too often we want to be politically correct. rather than just telling the truth. There has to be dramatic improvement in TAMCC. The government of Grenada, this government came into office, I think 2 days before the elections, I saw TAMCC lecturers standing with placards all around the roundabout. We have paid, I think, if I'm not mistaken, millions of dollars in all kind of retroactive stuff to settle this matter. It is now time for us to get from TAMCC the kind of progress, the kind of imagination, the kind of entrepreneurship that we need. It has to become a center of excellence, and that has to be led not by the Minister of Education could project the ideas, etc. You have a TAMCC council, you have a principal, you have staff. We can't spend all our time fighting over government increases in pay, increases in this, but what's the outcome? You know, are we even tracking our TAMCC students to see where they end up, how they achieve, what do they do, right? So we have to want and demand more in ensuring, because let me put this example. The cybersecurity training that we are doing as a sort of ad hoc pilot, frankly, should be run out of TAMCC. A lot of the skills training and if we want to take things like robotics and so on that are taking place, a lot of that should be coming out of TAMCC. The research for solving some of our climate issues or coral reefs, etc. Those things should be coming out of TAMCC and St. George's University. That's the whole point of having tertiary level institutions, so that they can create the future, they can create the research, the curiosity to solving the problems that we face. And if we're not doing that, then we just mark in time. So we really need to appreciate. And I say this because young people will tell you whether they find school interesting or not. Right. And when they're honest, they will tell you it is not interesting. It is boring. I could probably learn a lot of that online. Right? There are lecturers who don't come to classes, who don't teach. Right? I'm a teacher myself, and I have the utmost regard for teachers, but for those who don't fulfill their jobs and who don't deliver, the other teachers who are delivering have an obligation to keep them honest and to make sure that they deliver for the future of the country. So for me, TAMCC has to become a center of excellence. A fantastic opportunity was missed, regrettably, when a phenomenally successful son of the soil, Earl Nick Brathwaite, offered that partnership with the Canadian University, which for completely unknown and perhaps political reasons was not taken up. We would have had a completely different TAMCC today, and I think the educational as well as the success trajectory of Grenada would have been completely different. We don't have that, but that's not a reason for us to not go back to seeing how we can partner with persons who really want to transform TAMCC. And if we don't do that, and I want to keep emphasizing that, our asset is our people. It's not a beach, it's not the sun, it's our people. And if we don't take the investment in our people seriously, there will be no country worth fighting for, right? It's God who created the landscape, the sea, the beach, etc. We have to invest in ourselves and in our people, and that's why I want to re-emphasize that when we talk about things like centers of excellence, as I said, it's not just building new physical facilities, it's also looking at the ones we have and seeing how we can create them into the kind of centers of excellence that would be crucial for ensuring that 75 years from now, 25 years from now, we can achieve things like Vision 75. Now, people may think this is all hot air. It's not achievable. But I think, there are places in the Middle East, for example, that were pole and diving and fishing villages 50 years ago. Everybody wants to go there today. Mm-hmm. China has pulled hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty in 50 years.
And we have examples like the Singapore and others that are similar in nature.
Exactly. Barbados and Singapore in 1966 more or less were exactly on the same path. You could look at what Singapore has become. You could look at what Barbados has.
Investment, just in terms of institutional investment, and this one is probably like a bee in my bonnet. But as you know, over a decade ago, second largest land grant given to the University of the West Indies, and still nothing has happened in Hope. And one would have anticipated an investment there would have been transformative to that eastern corridor and certainly the northern part of Grenada. Where are we with those discussions?
Well, clearly, the University of the West Indies has not delivered on the campus. As part of their attempts to address this issue, they have made a counter proposal to us. We've studied the counter proposal. I'd be honest to say I don't think we are inclined to agree with it, but we need to obviously have further discussions with the University of the West Indies. It is our university, and so we really do want to support. But we also have to put Grenada. If we had to make a choice, we have to put Grenada first. So I expect in the coming year, a conclusive determination will be made on this issue because land is limited. It was a sizable land grant, and we have nothing to show for it today. So it is something that will require some deeper discussions, I think, with the university team. But yes, as part of the redevelopment of the rural economy, that parcel of land, in my view, is integral to that, and we will have to make some determination as to where we go.
Okay. Just in terms of education of our people, again, our marine environment. You say we are a small island state or we are large sea states, right?
Yes.
So where is the thrust in harnessing our human resources to maximize on the marine resources that surround us?
Right. And again, that goes right back to the question of education, because we need a center of excellence for our marine environment, from teaching swimming to diving, to snorkeling, to boat building, to boat repairing, to how we harness our fish stocks, to the marine biologists and marine researchers. All of that is needed. It doesn't exist right now. There is no school in Grenada, as far as I know, even regionally. There may be schools teaching marine biology and so on, but that's the extent of it. There's no school teaching boat building. We don't even have machine shops in Grenada to repair boat engines and so on. Training. We don't have training for underwater welders and so on. I mean, we have massive boats showing up in boatyards and so on, but there is absolutely no relationship whatsoever between our education system and any of that economic activity. So it's purely by happenstance or by accident that we're doing it. I have a very good friend of mine who went to school with me. He even became a policeman here for a brief period of time and then migrated. And he's into boat repairs and maintenance and fiberglass and so on. He learned all of that purely by accident and just trying to find a job.
Right.
When he migrated and would have stumbled on that and would have learned and trained himself, and someone taught him, and now he has his own business doing so. Right.
And we can't have a mega yacht facility, and whenever something goes wrong, we have to fly people in.
Precisely. So I'm saying that is the kind of opportunity, and I go back to TAMCCC because I'm saying that's the kind of things that we need, right? And we don't need to do everything. What we need to do is do the things that we know we have a natural advantage of, and we will get the economic, business, and development. Clearly, the marine environment is one of that. I was at the beach in Lansepine looking out from Calabash yesterday. The entire beach. I mean, there's not even a channel or a lane now. I mean, there are yachts anchored throughout. And that's another issue that we have to address. But I'm saying, and you sit there, you see the size of the mega yachts that put. You go to Clark's Bay, you see what is going on. You go to Lansepine, you go to Carriacou, right? So it is clear. And so sometimes I'm a little frustrated because I feel we're moving far too slow, right, for some of the obvious advantages that we need to take advantage of.
And just maximizing here now on things that we have already. We're not looking at anything.
We're not looking at anything else, right? Where the job opportunities are there. They are bringing almost all of the people maintaining boats, and they're importing labor to do it in the marine yards and the dockyards. And obviously we need the private sector as well to be more aggressive in partnering with the government in addressing some of those needs, because it means a lot of the money is going back out. If the people brought the boat here, obviously they want to bring some economic activity to the country. And if we can't service them, because we don't have mechanics and electricians and so on who understands the marine business and who've been trained in it, and as well, and I also want to make this point, education isn't just a government issue. It's not a government that owns St. George's University. And it's a hugely successful university. Most universities are not government owned. So there's also opportunities for private people, private businesses to invest in the education services. Right, so we also need our private sector to be a lot more enterprising and a lot more creative in terms of looking at where the economic opportunities are. Right? And if you have land, and if you have someone who's prepared to partner in bringing the skill set, and so I remember Singapore had to import every type of skill set to build the society because they didn't have it, right? And to train their people, ultimately we then got to that point where they were able to take over and do it, and that's a long-term plan. So I'm saying we also have to be enterprising in terms of saying what are the opportunities that are there in the education services where we can also make some money. Okay,
let's just switch to healthcare. Where are we with the new hospital at Hopevale Hospital Village?
Right, we are advancing. And so let me just recap and give context. Step one was to acquire the site. We've acquired the site. Step two was to put the team together so that we can begin to advance the process. The team consists of Andrea St. Bernard as the project sponsor, Deputy PS Mrs. Siobhan Britton from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Damian Dolan as the consultant, and they comprise the core team. We've created, as part of that, a cabinet subcommittee chaired by myself and other ministers of the cabinet that team reports to. And the starting point was, first, we recognize that if we really want a state-of-the-art, first-class teaching green hospital that can do medical tourism, we need to find a reputable international partner that is prepared to work with us on this project. And so the team spent some time essentially engaging and treating with a host of those international hospital operators and partners, ranging from entities in the Middle East, from Virgil to entities operating in the Caribbean, InterHealth, from the well-known American names, Mayo Clinic, Mount Sinai, etc. John Hopkins. They all came into Grenada, made their proposals, made their pitch. It was a two-pronged approach. One, to do a gap assessment of our current hospital, and two, to make a pitch for a long-term partnership. After that process was completed, the team recommended and the cabinet accepted working with Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai was given a consultancy, which is wrapping up to, in fact, do the gap assessment of the current situation at the hospital. The negotiations are ongoing in terms of the longer-term partnership. Now, this is critical. Because we have to accept the current management structure of our hospitals and the current, I would use the word tension, between the traditional management of our healthcare system through the Ministry of Health and the operations of the hospital don't always sync. In fact, in my view, they are not syncing. And so the need to make sure that the management of hospitals is a unique and particular thing that to some extent is completely separate from the Ministry of Health. And what the Ministry of Health needs to deal with. And so the gap assessment has already begun to make recommendations about the management structure that needs to be addressed at the hospital. No, not when we have a new hospital, to make sure that we begin to address those issues. So the negotiations in terms of Mount Sinai on a more long-term approach is ongoing. And let me put it this way, the team ranked the would-be partners, so that if we don't conclude one, we have the opportunity to engage with another.
And one may be able to do the gap analysis, but another take on the actual management of the facility. Right. Okay.
The second phase is that enormous work has been going on by the team in terms of looking at how we finance the construction of the hospital, because obviously that is critical. If you don't have financing, right, all of this is talk. So that work is ongoing as we speak. The second part is we have granted approval to engage in a tendering process and ultimate selection of a master site planner for the site, because we say we are building a medical city or village. The hospital is only part of that, and therefore you need to plan the entire site out so that although the hospital may become the linchpin of that, everybody who you're asking to come in and invest knows where what is going, where the hotel is going, where the potential retirement homes are going, where there are opportunities for other specialist services to be provided, etc., where the parks are going, where the trails are going, etc. So that entire planning out of the site has to happen, because ultimately a site like this will be developed over time. So that's also ongoing, and the team is already looking at putting together the terms of reference, and cabinet has approved for looking at a design, build, maintain model for the hospital from the point of view of selecting an EPC contractor to design, construct, and maintain the hospital. So all of those things are happening simultaneously, and I want the public to appreciate that this is a complex process. This is going to be a once in a 50 or 100 years process. That is the truth. And I would perhaps use a Calypso as an example. Before Looney's Park and Electrify, or before Boise gets the crown on Soca Moon Night, he would have had to spend a lot of time coming up with the idea, writing the song, rewriting the song, recording the song, practicing it, getting the musical arrangement right, perhaps even testing it on a couple of people to see if they say this is a hit or not before you could actually release it. And it's going to be the same thing with the hospital. There's going to be an enormous amount of work that has to go on in the background before we get to the point of actually building the hospital. We have to get the right contractor. We have to make sure we have the right designers in place, and then we have to make sure the right people to supervise and manage this process. We have set a very ambitious timeline for breaking ground. Right, so you therefore appreciate that I've put the team under enormous. We believe that they can do so. And we are confident based on some of the work that they're doing. Get the cheapest possible funding for this. So we are talking to every and anybody to make sure that we can get the
so
right.
It's a case where government will take on the loan as opposed to partnering with an investor to do the building.
Not necessarily. I think what we want to guarantee to the population of Grenada as well as to our investors is that we have the funding. So we want to be able to demonstrate that irrespective of what happens, we are building this hospital. Mm-hmm. So it may mean, in a sense, us entering into loan agreements to ensure that we get the funding as what I would call the backstop. And then being able to say to an investor, we have debt financing, for example, but we want to partner with you on an equity basis where you can come in and take whatever, because that way we feel that approach will make any potential partner take us a lot more seriously, because it recognizes that on our own we've already gone out and put ourselves in a minimum position where we can get the necessary financing. Where's the team
on the services that one would anticipate if we speak health tourism, for example?
Well, so we've retained Deloitte, which is a consulting firm, to in fact do the business case for us in relation to the business tourism, the medical tourism aspect of this. Again, because we don't just want to assume that this sounds like something that might work. We obviously need the research, we need the options, we need the best case scenario. But I think there's certain natural advantages. I mean, and obviously having St. George's University is one. Speaking English, Grenada is an amazingly diverse. To have in this compact area, clear white sand beaches, clear waters, and then have mountains and waterfalls and lakes and both black and grey and white sand beaches, to have amazing snorkeling and diving in Carriacou and Petit Martinique, to have the rich culture, heritage, the spices. I mean, the truth is, I think maybe because we have so much abundance that we have too much choice, so that we don't appreciate it. So Deloitte is doing that business case for us as well. And once
what's the timeline for their delivery?
Their delivery should be by the first quarter of this year.
First quarter of this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So we certainly anticipate, and obviously I'm giving that information, but as part of this process, the team is going to retain the PR firms to make sure that the marketing, the explanation, the transparency, the saying to the public what is happening, so that the public is aware of this. And I want to make this point. We are not saying building a hospital is going to fix our healthcare system. The building of the hospital is part of an economic model to make the provision of healthcare services a significant part of Grenada's GDP and economic growth.
Right.
Right.
And speaking of that, I would want you to segue into NHI, because I will ask you, where are we? Because this is something that over a decade and no delivery.
Right. So I will have to indicate to you, we too have not been happy. We had retained, we continue to retain JIPA, but internally, after reviewing the outcome and the performance over the last several months, the cabinet took a decision to terminate the contract and to relook the approach. We are absolutely committed to NHI, because we recognize that is part and parcel of how we will ensure that there's sustainability to the new healthcare system, not just the hospital. But I think we recognize that you have to creep before you walk. And therefore, starting, in our view, a simplified, NHI that ultimately is built up over the years, we think is a better approach, rather than an overly complicated system from the get-go. Grenada is still only 110,000 people. And so the same way in which our NIS and so on started small and have grown, we think we need to get to that point where the NHI actually starts as well. So what we've decided to do is to, in fact, look at reappointing a committee, homegrown but with a consultant, that would allow us to analyze what are the best options for us to be able to get us to a point where we can actually launch an NHI. So we would obviously be hearing more of this. We believe that is a far more straightforward and more effective approach, similarly to the approach we took with the pension reform, by having a committee and then having the committee retain a specialist consultant with the expertise and so on, that they can provide options and guidance, and then the committee can review, engage with all of the stakeholders, and then provide options to cabinet, so cabinet can make decisions in a timely manner and move this process forward. So that's where we are.
Okay.
With NHI.
You mentioned pension reform, so I will go there, but before I'm shouted at, I need to take our final break. So viewers and listeners, we'll take our final break and be right back with Prime Minister Mitchell.
The Grenada Independence Planning Committee, in collaboration with the Grenada Association of Toronto, under the auspices of the Consulate of Grenada in Toronto, present a series of activities in celebration of Grenada's 51st anniversary of independence in Ontario. These activities, under the theme, The Next 50, embracing a future of development, transformation and unity, are as follows. February 2nd from 3 p.m. Independence Anniversary Church Service of Thanksgiving at the First Baptist Church of Toronto, 101 Huron Street, Toronto, Ontario. February 7th, 12 noon, flag raising ceremony and reception at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, 1 Queen's Park, Ontario. Also on February 7th from 6:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of the Tower Clock at the City of Brampton in the national colors of Grenada. Later that evening from 9:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of Niagara Falls in the national colors of Grenada. February 8th from 6 p.m., the Grenada Independence Gala at the Parkview Manor, 55 Barber Green Road, North York, Ontario. And it culminates on February 16th at 1 p.m. with the Showcase Grenada exhibition at the JCA Centre, 995 Arrow Road, North York, Ontario. For additional information, please contact 416-595-1343 or 647-594-7210 or send an email to info@grenadaconsulate.com.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. We have Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell with us this evening on Beyond the Headlines. Prime Minister, pension reform. There was some debate, some conversations about it. Who are the beneficiaries of this initiative?
The beneficiaries of the initiative are largely all government employees who are currently not eligible to the current, what I would call constitutionally guaranteed pension. Except someone who's on probation, because until you confirmed, and except one other category of workers who currently have a gratuity, and I think that category is someone who's 50 years and older and who's been in the government employment for more than 15 years, because I think a prior specific arrangement was made for.
I've heard lots of conversations about contract workers.
Yes.
And share with us, if we agree that Grenadians should retire with a pension fund that is better than what NIS offers, why should, though, the government of Grenada be spending money, 3%, on short-term contract employees, and they should they be taking care of themselves, as it were, by virtue of the contracts that they're signing, or are we admitting that they're underpaid to begin with, and hence we're using this to supplement the income? Because, for example, a business executive may not have a pension plan, but would go into a retirement savings plan with an insurance company or some other provider. These contract employees, not all are low paid at the $1,200 or $1,500. One which may argue that they ought to be able to invest in themselves, yet still we see public funds making that investment as a counterpart funding. So why is the government taking this on?
No, so you need to just, you've said a lot, so let's clarify a couple of things. if someone genuinely has a short-term contract with the government of Grenada, they are not getting a pension in the scheme, right? Because the whole nature of a pension requires deductions from the employee and the employer over a sustained period of time that is vested in the employee after a certain period of time, and that the employee will get upon retirement or cessation of employment or death, in which case his estate will get it. So for instance, if the government retained some perfect example to assist it policy document, and that consultant is given a 6-month contract, that consultant is not eligible to the pension.
Right.
If you just employed by the government to do whatever, there is normally a probation period. During that probation period, the pension does not apply because you're not an indefinite or permanent employee. And I said outside of that special category of workers where there is a gratuity in place.
As you develop, make the distinction between permanent employee and established employee, if there is one.
Well, a lot of this is legalese, right? And it depends on whether you're talking private sector or public sector, right? The concept of established workers is really a public sector concept, and it is essentially speaking to public officers who are defined by the Constitution as public officers, and by virtue of that definition, they're entitled to be paid a pension under very specific pension acts that have been established in law. Almost all of them were passed, I think, all the way back to 1958.
Right.
So you're talking prison officers, police officers, teachers, and that category of what I will call nondescript established central government workers, people working in the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Infrastructure, or Health, as the case may be. Doctors and so on who are working for the government. And the word established is used to identify them as distinct from a large number of other government employees who were never officially recognized either by the Constitution or the regulations under the Public Service Commission as being public officers.
So you're saying that one can work with government on a permanent basis, but not part of the establishment.
Precisely. And there are drivers, cooks, cleaners, security persons who suffered that fate. So let's take the cooks who feed our children in school for 15, 20, 25 years. The construct doesn't have them as established. Don't ask me, and I'm not trying to explain to the public how all of these things were created. I met them like that. And so when they retire, generally there's no pension for them. Over time, a system of paying them a gratuity has developed. And under our administration, in fact, we've moved that sum to $500 per month. For people like the long list that I've just identified. But if that's all that mattered, it might have been easier to solve. Over the last 10 years in particular, and since the imposition of the self-imposed structural adjustment program, the government, and I'm not just saying the government simply because it would have been largely an NNP administration, I'm saying the government because government is a continuum. In an attempt to address the structural adjustment and to suggest that the real number of government employees was less than it actually is, would have created this system of saying we will hire people as contractors and give them the title contract for service. So that if the IMF or the World Bank or whoever is coming is going to say, well, these are not contractors, they are service providers. They're not really our employees. They're providing a service to the government at a fee. Well, that would have been fine if the person was coming to cut the lawn in the botanical gardens once a month, or if the person was coming to do maintenance on a building once a week. That's a completely different thing when that person's the clerk you're meeting at the desk every morning.
So really
technical, they're workers.
Right.
They're not established because what the government would have done would have been is to hire them with documents that actually says you are a contractor.
So the government employed these people and they didn't go through the PSC?
They did not go through the PSC. And you can do that. But I'm saying the document itself is saying you are a contractor for service, providing a service to me. And I'm providing you a service fee. And you have to pay your own NIS.
Okay.
And they either give you a 6 months or 12 months and they renew, or if you don't feel like renewing because you fret a politician or somebody, they just dismiss you. So you have to think of the implications of what I've just said. We don't even have to get into pension. You have no benefits. They're not even giving you a holiday, because if you're a genuine contractor, the man who's your plumber, who you call to do your plumbing, and pay him a service fee when he fixes your plumbing, he's not your employee, so he can't come and tell you he wants sick leave and holiday pay and what have you, and compensation for damage on the job. That's completely different from the lady who you hire as a domestic, who comes to work for you every day, 5 days a week, either cooking your food or cleaning your house or washing your laundry or looking after your children, whatever. That's a completely different arrangement. Clearly, the person is an employee. So what would have happened over the last decade is that thousands of people were hired in some form or variation of this kind of a mode, to the point where we have 4,500 people working like that in all of these various modes. The cooks, the drivers, whoever who've been unestablished, the people who've been hired as contract for service or off service, and so on. And so when we talk about regularizing, we are saying, let us look at a person who's established. They're entitled to holiday, sick leave, all kind of leave, bereavement, maternity, paternity. They're entitled to increments. They're entitled to, when collective bargaining agreements are negotiated, increases in their salaries. And they're entitled to an unfunded pension. And I want to emphasize the unfunded. The law says taxpayers have to pay your pension.
Right, so non-contributory.
Unfunded. And I'm saying unfunded because the government isn't setting aside no special fund in a separate account to pay those pensions. It is being paid straight to the consolidated fund. And I've made the point. And that's why it's also unfunded and not vested in you, because the stipulations that are set out say you must serve a certain period of time for you to be entitled to this pension. So if the period is 26 and a half years and you serve 25 and you die, your family ain't getting no pension because you haven't reached the 26 and a half. Right? But even if you reach the 26 and a half, if you have a government that decides, I have no intention of being a government that's subjecting myself to the law, as all of these governments over the last 40 years have, and they say they're not paying it, you gotta go to court and fight. There isn't even a fund that you can try and go after or attach. In the current system that we're creating, we are segregating the funds out of the consolidated fund into a trust fund. And in law, a trust fund has certain things. The trust is held for the beneficiary's benefit. So it means the trustees are going to be responsible for managing that fund, not for the government's benefit, but for the named employees who will each have their account number, etc., etc., etc. And after 5 years, the full amount, both the government and your contribution, would be vested in you and would even be transferable. So if you decided you don't want to work for government anymore, you can take that and move that pension to another pension fund.
It sounds very similar to what I use the term retirement savings plan.
Whatever term you want to call it, right? That's the goal. And before the 5 years, if you decided you wanted to leave, the savings that you would have made, you're entitled to get it back.
Okay. Right. Is this something that one would assume or hope, like the NIS was extended to all employees, that everyone has the opportunity to buy into this? I mean, so private sector as well.
That's absolutely the hope in the long run, because you see, the more people are on the pension, is the more you're pulling risk. Is the larger the pension investment sum becomes, and the larger you can make investments and get greater returns on it. So we are starting with those category of government employees that we've described. We are extending it to statutory bodies which don't have pensions and so on. And ultimately, we hope that particularly small businesses see this as an opportunity to join because what is going to happen is that the cost of managing the fund is for the next, I think we've agreed for the first 5 years that the government itself will even pay all of the administrative fees associated with managing the fund so that it doesn't actually affect the fund itself, right? So it's an opportunity for you to pull expenses that otherwise you alone would have had to meet. So if you had a business that has 10 people working for you and you wanted to do a pension or retirement savings for them and you went to a surgical or so on, you would have to pay them those administrative fees. If you join the government's, I'm saying the public sector pension, you don't have to pay those fees. Right. When I say you don't have to pay it, it will be spread across all of the employers and so on employees who are part of it.
Who would be the trustees? Because this is an important part. Because I know likewise there'll be investment and everything.
Right. The legislation has clearly set out who the trustees would be. And so you would have government representatives, you'd have union representatives, employees representatives, you'd have people with very specific skill set, actuarial skill set, financial skill set, legal skill set. So we're in the process, and obviously the recommendations are going to have to come in. The unions are going to have to recommend. We are going to recommend persons. There's certain set categories that the law has set out, I think Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, etc., to clearly set out. So the legislation clearly sets out the criteria for the trustees, not the names of the trustees. Yes. Those will have to be filled. We've already put out expressions of interest for investment, a fund manager, and for an administrative manager. These services are provided by insurance companies and pension administration fund companies locally and regionally, and so we will work through the next 90 days or so to get those contracts in place, to get the trustees appointed, and in the meantime we intend to start in fact operationalizing the pension, and so the Department of Public Administration will in the meantime provide the administrative support that we need to get us transitioning to that point.
How do you respond to some that say that this thrust is unconstitutional because you have public officers not being governed by the 1958 law?
Well, first of all, we have to understand law and rights. If you don't work for the government as of today, you're not a public officer, and you're not entitled to anything, and the government is free. So let me make it clear. The legislation is saying a person who is qualified and who meets the criteria of public officer based on the definition in the Constitution is entitled to a pension.
Right.
It isn't saying that everybody who works for the government is entitled to a pension. That's a completely different thing. If that was the case, all of the unestablished workers and so on who I talked to you about would have been able to sue the government successfully and say, I have to get a pension too. So the government is actually free to hire persons in any mode it wants. The question here is, are you going to exercise that discretion in a manner that is progressive and beneficial to your citizens and your employees, or are you going to use it in a manner that is abusive and unhelpful to them? And we're saying the mode of employment and in many instances, lack of any benefits has been abusive and unhelpful. It's not a question of whether it's constitutional or not. The government can, in fact, hire someone and say, these are the terms and conditions under which I hire you. I'm not paying you no pension. The Employment Act sets certain minimum things that you must comply with. So people are entitled to holiday. They're entitled to sick leave and so on. So you can't opt out of those. But they could say, for example, I'm hiring you and I'm not paying you a salary increase year in, year out, because the law doesn't say every year you're entitled to a salary increase. Those are things you negotiate as part of an agreement. That doesn't entitle you to a pension. So in recognizing that, and in trying to reduce the anomalies between people who are doing the exact same kind of work, but one happens to fall within the definition of a public officer under the Constitution and one who does not, we are saying because you are doing the exact same type of work, that's not fair. But there's also a point, because we are saying obviously, and let me give an example. I said these contractors for services were told, here's your service fee, you pay your NIS.
Right.
We reverse that. Think about the consequences of what that is doing. You are young, you've just gotten a government work. So if for the last 10 years you've worked as a contractor for service and not paid NIS, not only don't have a government pension, you have no social security at all. You don't even have an entitlement to paid sick leave on the NIS, to maternity leave on the NIS. You're not going to get the NIS pension because you're not making any contributions. Because most of them would not have had the discipline to say, I'm going to pay NIS myself. So ask yourself, If a government elected by the people institutes that kind of policy on its own people, do you actually care what happens to them? Why? For what? What's the argument? You need to tell the IMF you employ more people than you really need? So that's the other issue with this system, is that you could go and hire 10,000 people if you want. Many times they're not doing anything. But you're trying to buy votes. You're trying to create a reservoir of votes. So you're bloating the government wage bill. You're attempting to hide it by saying they're not really employees. And more importantly, you could manipulate them. Didn't believe what you were doing and get a loan because GDB would have employees rather than employees who have a 6-month contract or a 12-month contract. Just before the elections, you recognize these people have been saying to you, this mode of employment you've put me in, a banker, and you give it to GDB and say, well, because the bank will lend these people money, you lend them money now. Because effectively it's a government institution. So the point I'm making is it good for workers, in addition to a salary, to have additional benefits like sick leave, like maternity leave, like paternity leave, like workman's compensation, like some form of retirement savings plan? The answer is absolutely yes. And should we do everything to try and get to that point where people have that? Yes. Final point, and that's why I want to talk about the reality. And I want to say that to our citizens. There are a lot of people who will tell you about constitution and constitutionality and all kind of stories. You have to ask yourself, if you're one of the 4,500 plus persons who don't have a pension and who've not had one, where these people were over the last 10 years? Where were the advocacy for you? What did they do to highlight the situation or to try and solve the problem? I want to make it clear. This isn't costing this administration anything. Understand this. We are trying to give you something that you don't have in a sustainable manner that is yours. All of those who talk about constitution and constitutionality, they have theirs already 10 times over. And they have never sought to give you anything. So for me, this is not an issue about constitutionality. We are satisfied, having worked with consultants, having worked with the Attorney General's chambers, that there is nothing unconstitutional about the bill. The bill is not taking away anybody's rights. As I've said, the bill explicitly repeals the Pension Disqualification Act. The only people who have any right to a pension right now are these established public officers who are currently working. So a teacher who ain't yet working with the government 5 years from now has no rights.
So a teacher who's hired tomorrow,
yes,
what is the regime they come under?
They will come under the new pension regime.
Will they be defined as a quote-unquote established worker, and hence why the new one as opposed to the old?
I'm saying to you, obviously, I just made the point of saying we have the right to hire you in terms of the appropriate mode, right? And therefore, this whole notion of established and non-established workers is a notion that ultimately, I'm going to use this word, will no longer be of any distinction with a meaning. Because to a large extent, the single almost defining act of this is these pension issues.
And then the other question is, who does the hiring? Is it Government of Grenada or would it be Public Service Commission? That new teacher being hired tomorrow?
Well, I would simply say the Government of Grenada. At the end of the day, all employees really and truly work for the Government of Grenada. The Public Service Commission is a commission or a mechanism that was created as part of the Constitution, and I'm going to use this word in layman terms, to give some buffer to how you protect public officers from arbitrariness or political arbitrariness and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the Public Service Commission doesn't pay you. Right? The Public Service Commission, I will use this word, is a more disciplinarian, hiring, firing, promoting, etc. But they're not your employer. It's the taxpayers of Grenada who pay you, and it's the Government of Grenada who's employed you. right? Even with language like a public officer, a public servant, right? And we need to be careful that people don't tie us up into a lot of language issues that isn't dealing with the stark reality of what you're facing. And I want to re-emphasize this point. The more the government has to become the single biggest employer in a country, is the more the country will fail. Let me repeat that. The more the government has to become the single biggest employer in a country, the more the country will fail. Who pays the government? It's not the people who work for the government that pays the government. It's the rest of the population. It's the businesses. It's the private sector people. They are the ones who have to pay the taxes. And that is the taxes that we use to fund the government. And the government is you, if you work for the government. It's the services the government provides to the citizens, most of which are provided through you: policing, prison, etc. So if the only employees are government employees, then you have a failed state. And I think history has proven that attempts to make the state the sole employer everywhere in the world has failed. So we need to understand that this is not just about the pensions and so on. This is about the sustainability of the government and, by extension, the sustainability of the country, right? And the other things we need to talk about is how we grow the private sector, how we get more and more people to actually see the government as a last resort for employment and the private sector as the first resort for employment. So I'm saying these things to say, and that's why I repeat it. There are always advantages and disadvantages to any system, and we have to compare the advantages and the disadvantages, and we have to take things in the context of time. 1958, the number of persons working for the government was probably a couple hundred. In 2025, it is perhaps 10,000 people. It is simply not possible or sustainable to ask taxpayers, after you've worked and earned your salary, to then take taxpayers' funds and simply give you another 75 or 80% of that salary after you're retired when you're not working. There's one point I want to make, and the public needs to appreciate that. Under the current system that we have, there are public servants who are going to retire, and they are going to be paid. When you combine the NIS pension and the current, what I call unfunded taxpayers' pension, where they are going to be paid more money on their retirement than when they were working. In some cases, as much as 120% of their salaries. And right next to them, if we don't proceed with this pension reform bill, are going to be people who, if we left the system in place, where they were told to pay their NIS and all these kinds of things, would be retiring with not a pension. Not an NIS one, not a government one.
All right. It's almost time for us to close. So a couple of rapid-fire questions, if you would. So 1 or 2 sentences. The NMP leadership saga. What are your comments as we look towards the end of the year, the convention, and thereafter?
Well, I think you know I say no comment. I mind my own business.
But of course, you must have a comment other than no comment.
No, I mind my own business. I think it will not be on them. I think it will just be a comment in relation to institutions. And they need to build institutions to create a culture that is about progress and succession planning and longevity and sustainability rather than personalities and the cult of personalities. And I always said one of the reasons I ultimately made a very deliberate decision to join the National Democratic Congress is because I was satisfied that the institution, notwithstanding the challenges that it had been through, had demonstrated that it was an institution about progress, about tolerance, about a willingness to change, rather than about a personality. Because if it was not, I would not be sitting here today. Right? It is an institution that gave an opportunity for a whole new group of people who hitherto had no political experience or involvement, and give them an opportunity all the way to the top. which is what has given Grenada the opportunity to have your humble servant being given the opportunity to serve in the position that I'm serving. And so it is vital for us to build political institutions that encourages young people or retired persons who never thought about politics to feel that the institution is attractive, that it stands for something, that it means something, that it is a contributor to the development of the society outside of just the raw politics. And so our political institutions have a long way to go. In Grenada, if you go to St. Kitts, the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party is 90-something years old. If you go to Barbados, the LP and the BLP have stood the test of time, right? So we need political institutions that will stand the test of time. And I'm saying this, if you look at our history, is there any reason why the GLP should not be existing today? It's because it was built around a personality cult rather than an institution. And it's sad, because it would have had an illustrious history and something that I think young Grenadians would have been proud to want to join an organization that brought us independence, that was instrumental in improving the lives of the working class. But where is this institution today? Confined to the pages of history on the death of its founder, because effectively we created a personality cult. And I say this because I think there are obvious parallels that are taking place. If we don't build, you have an institution that is celebrating 40 years and it doesn't have a headquarters, a permanently owned building that people can go to, learn, study, exchange, meet, etc. And the National Democratic Congress is also seeking to address that very issue under my leadership, because we recognize you have to leave things for the next generation, both tangible and intangible. What is the history of our political parties? Where can a young secondary school child who wants to read up the history of the National Democratic Congress or the history of the GLP, where's the handbook? Where's the pictures of all of the leaders? Where is the notation of their contributions? What are the policies they've stood for? The National Democratic Congress is working on addressing all of those things, because we recognize, and I recognize, that I will be doing myself and the party and the next generation of Grenadians a huge disservice if after, when I have done my part and I walk, I can point to say this is the booklet and what NDC stands for. These are the policies. These are the former leaders and prime ministers. These are the progressive policies we implemented. Why? That we stand for the working class, that we've always supported them, that we were formed over disputes about firing and not firing public servants. That's why we fight for things for pension. That's why we fight for the things we fight for. We have to go beyond this mamagism and this vulgarity of thinking people stupid and all you have to do is offer them little cake and ice cream and alcohol and whatever, and give people dignity. If we don't do that, we are reducing ourselves to base animals. And I think all of mankind's civilization has been a fight to make sure that we don't go back down there. Right? So I'm saying that our political institutions need to step up to making sure that we are respected institutions that people want to be associated with, that people want to be proud members of, rather than, I don't want to have anything to do with these people and them. Right, so we have a long way to go, and I think if we don't start addressing those issues, then every 10, 15 years you have to start forming a new party and creating a new party. The days for those things should really be over. We should really have been working with the foundation, frankly, the foundation parties that started pre-independence because of what they stood for. And as a relatively young person, it actually pains me that so many of our political institutions have collapsed and will be written off from the history and the memory of Grenada, simply because of the fact that the persons who were involved were more interested in themselves and their egos and the power rather than building institutions and recognizing this is about service and not about self. And we need to ensure that for the next 50 years, we can have stable, whether it's two-party, three-party political organizations that recognize the importance of political stability in the institutions, and to do away this nonsense about who else will run it and who can run it and that kind of thing, as if somehow one person has superpowers that the other human being is not built with. And what's sad to me is that there's so much obvious examples right around the region of the strength of political parties, of the importance of them, and that a party should not be subjected to the whims of a man or woman forever. So hopefully, coming out of all of this, we can move to a place where the strengthening of our political institutions leads to them being seen as attractive institutions that people want to associate, affiliate with, and work and help build. And not always I'm only joining because of what I can get, or I hope when we get into government I can get something back and that sort of thing. Because if we continue like that, our political discourse and our policy making will not rise, because we will not be attracting the right set of people to join those institutions.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I will give you the opportunity, despite those comments, for our last comment as we close. So, to the people of Grenada, as we begin this new year, your wishes for them as well as your admonition as we advance.
No, well, I never feel I could admonish our citizens. I want to thank them for the faith they've placed in me and the National Democratic Congress administration over the last 2.5 years. I want to thank them for the tremendous support, the prayers, the encouragement, and the criticism, because they have to hold us accountable, and in areas where we can do better, point that out to us. To re-emphasize, you know, I'm going to quote someone who said that, and I'm going to, when you embarked, that we might have been gifted amateurs when the population of Grenada embarked on this journey with us. And it's time for us to become professionals. You know, it's time for us to commit to working hard, to being very strategic, to being planned, to being transformative, to be more communicative, and to being there for people. And I think we certainly intend to do that in the next 2.5 years. But I also want to encourage us to be kinder to each other, to speak in more positive and uplifting terms. I sometimes, when I occasionally glance through social media and so on, it's sometimes quite disappointing to see the sort of race to the barrel, negative sort of rhetoric that's always there, that frankly creates mental illness in people. That's not an attractive world, and we need to live in a real world and engage with each other, and you'd find that there's a lot more happiness, a lot more hope, and a lot more prospects for a brighter future in each other, not always on social media. You know, and that's why I'm saying, if we adopt a neighbor by simply looking out for the person next to us, it might be a child, it might be a senior citizen, you know, we will make each other's lives a lot easier, a lot happier, and we will make our communities a lot easier, a lot happier, and we'll be able to really move Grenada forward. So, you know, I really look forward to this year. I think it will be an exciting year. We certainly have a lot that we need to work on, but the spirit of unity is still very much important, and I think once we keep that in mind, we should have an exciting and fun-filled year. No major natural or geopolitical shocks, but if we do have that, then I'm sure the powers of our prayer warriors will assist us in navigating this through. And I just want to announce to the public, since I have the opportunity, that myself and the Foreign Minister and the Minister for Economic Development, that's Minister Lennox Andrews and Minister Joseph Andal, together with a delegation, will be traveling to the People's Republic of China on the 9th of January to mark the 20th anniversary of the resumption of diplomatic relations between Grenada and China. And during that time, Minister Williams will act as Prime Minister. I will be the first head of state to be visiting China for 2025. And I will be having an audience with President Xi Jinping himself. So we look forward, obviously, to marking what is a significant occasion in Grenada's diplomatic relations with China. And China has been a steadfast partner to Grenada and the developing world, certainly since our resumption of diplomatic relations to them. So I want to take the opportunity to also wish our Chinese counterparts a Happy New Year. I know the Chinese New Year has not yet started, correct, but to wish them that. But we really do have an exciting, I think, 2025 ahead of us, both in terms of our legislative agenda, our policy agenda. And don't worry, the budget will be read either the last week of February or the first week of March.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell, thank you so very much for playing overtime with us this evening. It was a pleasure having you to kick off Beyond the Headlines for 2025, as you've done for the last 3 years.
To Ontario, February 7th, 12 noon, flag raising ceremony and reception at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, 1 Queen's Park, Ontario. Also on February 7 from 6:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of the Tower Clock at the City of Brampton in the national colours of Grenada. Later that evening from 9:30 p.m., the symbolic illumination of Niagara Falls in the national colours of Grenada. February 8th from 6 p.m., the Grenada Independence Gala at the Parkview Manor, 55 Barber Green Road, North York, Ontario. And it culminates on February 16th at 1 p.m. with the Showcase Grenada exhibition at the JCA Centre, 995 Hour Road, North York, Ontario. For additional information, please contact 416-595-1343 or 647-594-7210 or send an email to info@grenadaconsulate.com.
Thank you for being part of the Heartbeat today, and I look forward to your company next Sunday when we will endeavor to have equally stimulating and informative programs for you. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Until next week, goodbye.